Good afternoon. And welcome to September. Can we believe it? It actually feels like September outside today. So this is the September edition of Medical Monday. And today we have our special guest speaker is Miller-Duncil from Centerstone. And she has a lot of information on suicide awareness. As well as I also want to introduce my Reid co-workers from behavioral health. And ladies and gentlemen, can you stand please? So they are, and also it spans not only are they in Richmond, but we have a quite extensive facility in Connersville. So thank you, and they will also join in from time to time to speak with and to join in with Cinnamon. So without further ado, I'm proud to introduce Miller-Duncil.
Thank you, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me in the back. I am the walk chair for our East Central Out of the Darkness Walk for American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, Indiana chapter. I am also a therapist at the Centerstone Richmond Child Family team and a suicide loss survivor. I often collaborate with our staff, with Reid, in relations to more of the Reid Care Pavilion for our youth. And I thank you for joining us today for this presentation. Suicide can be a sensitive topic to discuss, but talking about suicide is critical to its prevention, and we are grateful that you have joined us for this important conversation. Are there any mental health professionals in our audience? If so, please raise your hand. If at any point during our presentation today you feel the need to step out, please feel free to do so. And one of our mental health providers will follow you out to ensure that you're okay. If it's for anything else other than for mental health, please let us know that as well, so we don't follow you. Overall, we hope that you are able to learn more about suicide prevention from today's presentation and become more comfortable talking about this important issue. And we will do questions at the end. Despite its complexity, suicide can be prevented. Just like there are warning signs and risk factors for other health crises like cardiac arrest, we can learn the warning signs and risk factors that can help us to prevent people from dying by suicide. As with other health issues, prevention can start early, far in advance of the problem, or prevention can occur closer to the time of the crisis. Time can be critical for life-saving measure. Typically, a life can be saved if you allow time for the person's suicide risk to subside or to get through that period of distress and to get mental health help. To prevent suicide, we need to identify persons who may be suicidal as well as take an active role in connecting them to help before they take action to end their lives. The purpose of Talk Saves Lives is to provide community members with a general overview about suicide, who it affects, and what can be done to prevent it. This presentation will cover some statistics to give you an idea of the scope of problem of suicide. We will review some key research findings, including the risk and protective factors that relate to suicide, and we'll talk about what works and what we can do, all to prevent this leading cause of death. How we talk about suicide matters. Before we get started, I want to go over terminology that is used when we talk about suicide. It is important to model appropriate language so that we do not perpetuate the stigma of suicide or mental health conditions. Establishing a baseline of shared language on this topic. We avoid the phrases committed suicide as it can have a negative connotation. Instead, we encourage the phrases died by suicide, ended their life, or killed themselves. When talking about suicide and suicide attempts, we avoid referring to suicide attempts as failed or successful. Not only is it unnecessary, these words imply judgment. Instead, we encourage the use of phrases such as suicide attempt, suicide, or death by suicide. Educating the public about suicide is critical for encouraging help seeking, raising awareness of risk in vulnerable populations, and advocating for new interventions and prevention strategies for those at risk. When suicide is talked about safely and accurately, we can help reduce the likelihood of its occurrence. We want to change how society understands mental health and suicide because when we open up and connect, talk saves lives. Suicide is a significant issue that affects individuals, families, and communities worldwide. So let's start with some statistics that demonstrate the scope of the problem. Suicide is a global problem. According to the World Health Organization, each year over 800,000 people die by suicide worldwide. While this is the most accurate data available, we estimate the numbers to be higher, since suicide is underreported in many countries. That works out to suicide every 40 seconds worldwide. In the United States, suicide rates are recorded by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. According to the CDC, 47,511 people died by suicide in 2019. This is the most recent data available. This makes suicide the 10th leading cause of death. Suicide takes more lives in the U.S. than homicide, war, and natural disasters combined. These high numbers are one of the many reasons that it's important to talk about suicide like any other cause of death. The more we talk, the less stigmatized the idea that we all face struggles and need support becomes. For every death by suicide, it's estimated that 25 others attempt. That's about 1 million Americans a year who survive a suicide attempt. When you think about any loss it impacts many people in the community. Suicide is no different. The loss affects family, friends, co-workers, neighbors, schools, faith communities, etc. It is estimated that the majority of Americans will experience a suicide loss over the course of their lifetime. Let's move on to research. Only in the past several decades have scientists been studying suicide. Research is shedding light on many critical areas that drives up risk and what that amounts to effective suicide prevention, and we still have more to learn. This section provides an overview of suicide prevention research, key research findings, and the future goals in the field. One of the main questions research explores is, why do people take their own lives? Through research, we have learned that there's no single cause for suicide. Suicide most often occurs when several stressors and health issues converge to create an experience of hopelessness and despair. Research has consistently shown that the large majority of people who die by suicide have a mental health condition at the time of their death. It may or may not have been recognized by the person or their loved ones, may not have been diagnosed or adequately treated. That said, research has also made clear that mental health conditions cannot be the whole story. The vast majority of people who have these health conditions do not die by suicide. In addition to mental health conditions, there are many other factors that increase as well. We've learned that the brains of people who die by suicide differ from those who die from other causes in terms of structure and function, specifically in the areas related to the stress response and impulse control. We've also learned that most people who are suicidal are ambivalent about taking their life. Part of them wants to live, part of them wants to die. This research has informed key strategies in suicide prevention that involve engaging the part of the person that wants to stay alive and helping to create distance from the part of them that wants to die. One way we do that is to help the person connect with reasons for living while at the same time decreasing the visibility and presence of things around them that may facilitate their desire to die. One of the many important things we have learned from research is about the perspective of a suicidal person. That a crisis point has been reached. For a suicidal person, the pain seems unbearable, whether it's emotional pain, physical pain, or sometimes both. For a moment, I'd like to think back to the most physically painful experience of your life. At that moment, would you have been able to give someone clear and accurate directions to your house? Probably not. The pain makes ordinary thinking nearly impossible. For a suicidal person, thinking becomes constricted at that moment of crisis, a state of intense tunnel vision where other options seem unavailable. Someone who considers suicide cannot foresee a time when that unbearable pain will end. Understanding the perspective of the suicidal person has also helped us to learn that suicidal feelings are often temporary. They can come on intensely and can sometimes pass in minutes or hours. Keeping people safe and helping them feel supported can get them through those critical moments. There is evidence that putting time and distance between an individual who is suicidal and the means to take their life can be life-saving action. This is why it is so important that we take steps when we know someone is struggling to help keep them safe. Research has also determined the key factors that increase the risk for suicide. Risk factors are defined as characteristics or conditions that increase the chance of a person may take their life. Risk factors are important to know to understand the big picture of someone who is considering suicide. Just like someone who is at risk for heart disease because of high blood pressure or a history of heart disease in the family, some people are at higher risk for suicide than others. The main risks shown here can be grouped into 3 categories: health factors, historical factors, and environmental factors. These risk factors can converge at different times in life and increase a person's risk for suicidal behavior at particular points in time. Let's look a little closer. The first type of risk factors include health factors such as biological and psychological medical conditions, the most significant of which are mental health conditions. As we said before, most people who die by suicide have an active mental health problem at the time of their death. Depression is the most common mental health condition and the one that is most associated with suicide. Bipolar disorder is also shown to be high risk, although the disorder is less common than depression. Because these conditions put a person at greater risk for suicide, detecting the presence of a mental health condition is critically important. The best way to be sure when you feel concerned or detect a possible change in you or your loved one's mental health is for the person at risk to seek a professional evaluation and effective treatment. Many people may not realize that their distress may actually become a health problem. Providing information about how to access mental health care or a crisis number if their distress is high can be a solid step in helping them connect to the help they need. We will talk more about this later in the discussion and when we directly address prevention. Mental health conditions are not the only health factors that are associated with suicide risk. Serious or chronic health conditions can increase risk, especially when the person also has mental health issues. Chronic pain and serious head injuries have also been found to increase suicide risk. The second type of risk factors include historical factors such as a family history of suicide, a family history of mental health conditions, or past trauma such as sexual abuse or combat stress. Research has also found that a history of childhood abuse can contribute to suicide risk. And while most people who attempt suicide do not go on to die by suicide, previous suicide attempts are also considered historical risk factors for suicide and also put a person at increased risk. The third type of risk factors are environmental factors that involve the circumstances of a person's life. Often there are aspects of a person's environment that can contribute to their overall level of risk. Let's look at a few of those most common. Having access to a way of killing oneself is referred to as access to lethal means. This includes having access to a variety of things such as firearms, drugs, a bridge, a car, etc. Research has shown that contagion, the exposure to another person's suicide, or to graphic or sensationalized accounts of suicide, especially among those with other risk factors, can increase a person's risk of suicide. Prolonged stress may include harassment, bullying, relationship problems, legal problems, and unemployment. Stressful life events, which vary across the lifespan, include experiences like divorce, legal problems, or job loss. To better understand suicide risk, here's an example of a set of risk factors that can converge in a person who is suicidal. This example shows what is often the public perception of suicide when someone dies by suicide. Often the story only talks about the environmental factors. People see a life event like a breakup or bullying or a job loss, and then they see the person die by suicide, so they might assume the person killed themselves because of that stressful life event. But that's never the full story. What others don't know is the person who died may have a genetic risk for suicide. Maybe they were suffering from depression and anxiety disorders, and their work life had become increasingly stressful. Their underlying depression and anxiety could have made the situation at work even worse, or the work stress could have made their depression worse. Perhaps they'd also been drinking more than normal. The key is that the combination of risk factors could have contributed to the suicide death. Therefore, while a life event can play a precipitating role for suicidal behavior without underlying risk factors, the life events alone aren't thought to cause the suicide. Looking to the future, research will help us find the best ways to fight suicide. Research is looking for biomarkers, for example, something testable in a blood sample that would help us to identify those at risk. A number of clinical treatments, like particular types of therapy, are effective for suicidal people, and and more need to be developed and studied. The good news is that through research, we are learning more and more about what helps those who are in a suicidal crisis. Research can also help us to identify the most effective programs and interventions to reduce suicide rates and to reduce risk in those suffering from mental health conditions. On to prevention. Just like there are risk factors that increase a person's risk for suicide, are also protective factors that lower a person's risk. If you are proactive about mental health and make an effort to get healthier, you protect yourself. More on this in just a moment. Feeling connected to a family and community support can protect against suicide. When someone is struggling with depression, anxiety, psychosis, and substance abuse, these protective factors that may normally be strong can erode and temporarily weaken. When that happens, having friends and family to remind us our strengths can be a tremendous protective factor. Problem-solving skills also help. Life can get really tough, but being able to see a way through problems can be a protective factor. Cultural and religious beliefs that encourage connecting and help-seeking, discourage suicidal behavior, or create strong sense of purpose can also be a protective factor. Because mental health care is so important for preventing suicide, we are going to focus on this topic for the next few minutes. Getting effective treatment for mental health conditions like depression or anxiety can prevent suicide. Critical to suicide prevention is getting people connected to mental health treatment. One of the biggest challenges in fighting suicide is getting people to address their mental health in the same way they would their physical health. In fact, of those suffering from mental health condition, less than half seek treatment. One way to encourage individuals to seek help for their mental health conditions is to treat mental health like any other aspect of our health. There are certain times when a person becomes ill and it's critical to seek a trained professional. We need a culture where everyone knows it's smart to take care of our mental health. Taking care of our mental health is just as important as taking care of our physical health. Seeing a mental health professional is a sign of strength, and many are taking that step. The person seeking help should request a thorough evaluation to figure out if there is a mental health condition affecting their life. There are many types of treatment available, like various kinds of psychotherapy and medications. Research has shown that for many people, the combination of psychotherapy and medications tend to be the most helpful. But the most important thing is to find the treatment that works best for the individual. The good news is that the advocacy efforts are improving access to mental health services so that more people can get the treatment they need. The law now requires insurance plans to cover mental health services on par with physical health services. If we need mental health services, and 1 out of 4 of us will at some point, we should get treated and get our health back on track faster. Just like people can find strategies that optimize their physical health, people can do the same for their mental health. In addition to professional mental health care, proactive self-care strategies like good sleep habits, exercise, nutrition, and stress management can also play a critical role in protecting mental health and promoting resilience. Prevention efforts also include support for those touched by suicide. The loss of one person to suicide profoundly impacts many. It's important that survivors have the support they need both to heal and to reduce their own suicide risk. And since those with lived experience, those who have attempted suicide or who experience suicidal thinking are at an increased risk, we need to make sure they have the support they need too. For the people who are at a crisis point, the most important thing you can put between a suicidal person and their way of ending their life is time. Research shows that by temporarily reducing a suicidal person's access to lethal means, we give a suicidal individual's time. Time for the intense suicidal risk to diminish, and time for someone to intervene with mental health support and resources. For the majority of people who experience a suicidal crisis, if unable to access their chosen method, even temporarily, they are unlikely to engage in another action to end their lives. In most cases, when a suicidal person doesn't have current access to the means that has been on their mind, they don't substitute with another method. Therefore, a clear way to prevent suicide is to limit access to lethal means. During a period of high risk, the safer their environment is, the better chance a suicidal person has of living through that crisis period. Suicide prevention research has looked at a number of ways to create safer environments. Installing an inexpensive carbon monoxide sensor that would automatically shut cars off as carbon monoxide levels reach unsafe levels would save lives. We've learned through research that installing barriers on bridges deters suicides, and in many cases, bridge barriers actually lower the suicide rate for the entire region. Restricting access to potentially lethal medications reduces suicides and can be as simple as requiring lethal drugs to be sold in blister packaging. Firearm safety is critical to reducing suicide rates. In the United States, firearms are used in roughly half of all suicides, making suicide prevention an important part of gun safety education. As noted already, and contrary to what you may think, when access to lethal means are limited, most people who are suicidal do not find other means. Therefore, the suicide death does not occur in that moment, allowing more time for the person in crisis to get connected to help. Now that we have reviewed the key suicide prevention efforts, let's talk about what we all can do to help prevent suicide. It's important that we have a caring, supportive conversation with someone you might be worried about to allow them to share what they are experiencing. A conversation is a way to show you care and allows you to gain more information about their level of distress. Let's start by talking about the suicide warning signs. Watch for the warning signs in yourself and others. While many of the suicide risk factors we discuss endure over a longer period of time, warning signs are observable signs that signal suicidal risk in their near future. It is important to pay attention to both the risk factors discussed earlier and the warning signs we are talking about now. If you see warning signs, reach out to individuals in your life you're concerned about and reach out to others if you're struggling. Seek mental health services if you are depressed or if your anxiety regularly interferes with your daily life, and encourage others to do the same. Suicide warning signs are typically displayed in three main ways that we can detect: talk, behavior, and mood. We will discuss each one of these in more detail. Many people who are suicidal talk about ending their lives. This may be directly or indirectly. A person might say it outright or they might joke about it. Take it seriously. Some people say they have no reason to live. Others say things that let you know that they feel trapped or that they are a burden to others. Or they might talk about feeling overwhelmed or being in an unbearable pain. Behaviors that are typical or atypical for an individual should also encourage you to speak to a person about what you are noticing. People thinking about suicide can display certain behaviors. There may be an increased use of alcohol or drugs. They may have trouble sleeping, either experiencing insomnia or sleeping too much. They may start acting more recklessly. They might withdraw from activities, especially from activities they normally enjoy. They may isolate themselves from family and friends. They also might look for a way to kill themselves, such as searching online for methods or shopping for a firearm. They may also give away their possessions or show a related behavior, reckless spending. People at risk for suicide can display, quite often subtly, any of the following moods: depression, apathy, rage, irritability, impulsivity, humiliation, anxiety. Moods one would expect from someone who feels overwhelmed and desperate. We all have ups and downs in our moods, but when you notice a change that seems uncharacteristic or concerning, it is important to speak to the person about what you are noticing. For example, sudden unexplained happiness can indicate the individual has decided on a plan and is relieved that they no longer will be in pain. That's a lot of things to look for, so to sum it up, look for changes in behavior and trust your instincts. Assume you are the only one who's going to reach out. In too many instances, people talked about their concern for someone amongst themselves but hesitate to reach out to the person directly. So here's a rule of thumb. If you're wondering if someone is depressed or overly anxious, that's a surge sign you should reach out. Same goes for you. If you are having suicidal thoughts, that's a sure sign that you need to seek help. If you have reached out before, reach out again. The first time the person may not be receptive. Keep trying. Try talking to someone else or with a professional. And even if suicide turns out to be a concern, they may still be in distress, and they may feel comforted and supported just by knowing you care and are taking the time to listen. So how do you reach out to someone? Talk to them in private. Listen to their story. Express concern and caring. Ask directly about suicidal thoughts. Don't be afraid to ask the question, are you thinking of ending your life? Encourage them to seek mental health services. If in a crisis, take them to get help. There are some things to avoid when talking with someone who may be suffering from depression or anxiety. Avoid minimizing their feelings. Those of us who have never experienced major depression literally cannot imagine what it feels like. Avoid trying to convince them life is worth living. If a person is nearing a crisis point, they are not thinking clearly. Philosophical debates about life being worth living tend to not be helpful. Avoid advice to fix it. If the person is having a heart attack, you wouldn't tell them to start exercising or to eat a healthier diet. If they are in crisis, what they need to be heard, then led to help. Listen to their story and offer to help them find a professional. Help them take active steps toward keeping them in a safe environment. If you think they might make an attempt on their life soon, stay with them. Do not leave them alone. However, if the situation puts your own safety at risk, leave the area immediately and call 911. Help them remove lethal means or remove themselves from a potentially dangerous area. Escort them to mental health services or to an emergency room. Help them to call the Lifeline or to call the Lifeline yourself, and a trained counselor will tell you what you should do to help the person in distress. If they don't feel comfortable speaking to a counselor on the phone, they can also text to the crisis text line at 741-741. If it's an emergency, such as a suicide attempt in progress, call 911. Together, we can create a culture that's smart about mental health, will save lives, and vastly improve the lives of many more. It's a simple yet powerful idea. Talk saves lives by caring and reaching out when we can all play a part in suicide prevention. And that is it. Are there any questions? Yes.
So the new 988 number that came out recently, is that connected with this? Like, did that replace this?
Those are still, so I checked on that this morning. Those are still active. Those numbers are still active, but the 988 is also active now as well.
I was saying, because I did have a patient who did call the 988 number. So, yeah.
Yeah.
She wasn't.
So they haven't taken away the old information, but they still have everything active.
Okay.
There's a plan to merge the
Yeah.
phone lines over the next 6 months.
So some of what AFSP does, American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, it's not just fun. So some of the funds that we raise stay within our state, but they do advocacy at our state and national levels for a lot of the laws. Some of those are for the law, even for just getting our mental health, access to our mental health for our health insurance now. That was changed. We now have in the schools, every school in the state of Indiana has to have an MOU with a mental health provider. Things like that. All the teachers are required to have training for suicide prevention as well. So there's just different things that go on. And AFSP does a lot of research as well. So, and then they do a lot of free trainings for us through that funding.
So suicide awareness, September is Suicide Awareness and Prevention Month. And so Seven graciously volunteered to come speak today. And I just want you guys to take advantage of asking any questions. You have a wealth of knowledge around this table. We have a lot of therapists sitting here in the room. And so suicide is a very hard topic to talk about, but it really does touch us in one way, shape, or form. It hits us close to home. So please, if you guys have any questions, even if it's really hard, you can come and talk to us separately, or feel free to ask us out here too.
And the data she presented also is pre-COVID. We've seen dramatic increases in mental health issues and conditions since COVID happened. And so seeing that, going into quarantine is very isolating, obviously, and the impact on mental health and well-being, trying to get back to that healthier place, whatever that looks like now, is a struggle for a lot of us. And so just being aware of your loved ones, seeing changes in behaviors and such, and like someone mentioned, listen to your gut. It's better to upset somebody and they be well and they be okay than not say anything and miss an opportunity.
Our walk is on Saturday, October 8th, and the last couple years we've kind of gotten bigger and grown bigger. We do have a lot of community mental health or community providers, not just for mental health, but also physical health that will be there. We have advocate, I'm trying to think what Brian is. He does a lot with the Medicare. He'll be there. Just different community providers will be at the walk as well, to come and visit. Even if you're not there for the suicide prevention, if you want to come and just visit the community providers.
Can you explain what the Out of Darkness Walk is?
The Out of the Darkness Walk is for those, it's for those that have attempted or for those that have lost, and it's a time for us to, it's similar to like the cancer walks, et cetera. It's a time for us to gather and to acknowledge each other and to acknowledge our families. Myself, I lost my son when he was 17, so to say that it doesn't hit you at a young age, it does. We walk in teams. We support each other. In November, we have an actual suicide loss survivor dinner that has become this will be our second one this year, coming this year for our community. Suicide discussion is hard in our community just because some of it is political, trying to navigate the political atmosphere of it. As a professional, I've seen that over the last 10 years. To have experienced it myself, it's been even harder. And to try and get acknowledgement for those that are in need and to reduce the barriers to services is unreal. It's harder for adults to receive services than it is for a child. I can tell you that. Just being on both sides of that. So our walk is to be able to get those people who might be in need, to catch them with the community providers, to reach out then. And we do it in a means of it being open to the community, to everyone, to access.
Senator, what would be the biggest, what you think of stigma associated with suicide?
Anybody else want to jump in? There is so much. Jessica also sits on, we have a committee for American Foundation for Suicide Prevention for our community, and we do, was it about 7 counties now? So Jessica's one of those. I'll let you.
I would say the biggest stigma is that it's selfish. I would say that there is nothing selfish about suicide. It's actually just a break. That's all that the person can think about, is just escaping whatever it is. They're not thinking about what it does to anyone else. They're not thinking about what the after effects may be. They're just hopeless. They're alone, yeah. And so it's, I would say the biggest stigma, the biggest falsity is that it's a selfish act.
The number of kids that we're seeing now that are committing suicide, and you said it's partly from an underlying mental
Health need, yeah.
But what if it's just where these kids are on their iPads and cell phones being dared to do it? That's been a lot of the cases too. That, your buddy said, put it on FaceTime so I can watch you do it. And then the kid does it. So.
I don't know that I've seen that as much.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of it.
I know that's what you see of it. I think our influx of youth that have come in, especially over COVID, has, I don't want to say doubled in numbers of kids being serviced. The number of kids living in trauma, living in environments that are hard. They have access to phones, which we didn't have back in the day. That, I don't want to say promotes it, I want to say that gives it more opportunity to be out there. We talk about it more with the kids. We're more open about it with the kids, more forward about it, versus when I was growing up. I should say it that way.
The media media only shows one side of it, they don't give you the background. So Cinnamon talked about risk factors. So what media doesn't show you are the homes that these kids are living in, is the depression or the bullying that went on. They don't show you everything. They just, you know, I see it on Facebook too, or these little snippets off the media, like kid mimics, you know, friend who commits suicide. But Cinnamon's right, the chances of suicide risk doubles if a loved one commits suicide in your family. So that is also a risk factor. So that is part of it, but media never gives you the full story.
But she said there was a difference between the way they treat an adult and they do a child, so
Because we're responsible as parents for our children's health.
they're gonna blame it on you, on the child, on you how you treat the child, or as an adult, you just got a mental problem. If you're a kid with a
So
mental
access
problem,
to
it's your parents'
services,
fault.
so access to services when you're 18, so when a child is under the age of 18, Jennifer, you want to help with this?
Yes, okay, during COVID, both my son and my daughter tried to kill themselves. Okay, they are of age. My daughter will be 24 this month. Thank God she's still here. My son the same. Trying to get them into services was a nightmare, a nightmare. My daughter, this happened the 1st of March. She just now got a psych eval. She finally got her psych eval. And I've worked in the mental health for almost 20 years. So, you know, and
Why
I
did
just,
it take so long?
number one, she had to get insurance. It was crazy. She did get on Medicaid. She actually got the best Medicaid. Let's see, the follow-up, there was no follow-up after she left for her attempt. No follow-up from the provider. Just trying to find her provider was insane. There was a wait list, no callback.
When they're not doing their job, couldn't you go to somebody else on them? With them not doing
So
their job?
there's a national shortage of therapists. So
It was a nightmare.
you can, I mean, there's a lot of different organizations in this room, so I'm sure Reid's not the only one. But nationally, every mental health organization out there is very short on therapists. And it is a very sad truth. It is extremely heartbreaking.
I can see them.
And it's not uncommon to get on a wait list that's 6 to 9 months. And when I'm depressed and suicidal, do you think that's gonna wait 6 to 9 months? I mean, the challenge is overwhelming.
And I would add to that, not only the wait to get into services, but even when you're in services, the wait in between sessions has
Yes.
grown because we have so many clients now that we can't fit people in like we know we need to. So it's the wait between. So if someone's actively suicidal and they had a session on this past Tuesday, it may be another 2 to 4 weeks before we get to see them
How
again.
many kids kill themselves, waiting along the lines?
Well, in Wayne County, the numbers, so in any state, you really can't give the numbers for kids because they're under the age of 18. I'm only forward about my son. Majority of the numbers are adults that are in our community. So trying to get our adults access to services is what we're trying to move forward with right now.
So, Cinnamon, do you
Go
mind if
ahead.
I interject? So my name is Kayla. I'm also an AFSP volunteer. So I think something that we can probably take away from this conversation is that the information that Cinnamon shared today is really important because each of us has a role in our own family, right? We know that there's a shortage of providers. We know that there's probably wait lists. And so it's even more critical for us to be able to step in the gap and educate ourselves to be able to protect our loved ones and our family and our friends by providing support and intervention. And I think the other thing that we can take away is, there are these problems with our mental health system. And so AFSP and other organizations are trying to do advocacy and bridge those gaps legally so that we can get better services. so that we have more access. And I can't tell you what the solution is to all those problems, but supporting organizations like AFSP and supporting in ways that you can local providers and what they're doing is also very important. So I think that those are, to kind of remember those things. I know it's sometimes we start these conversations and it seems so overwhelming, the problems that we're facing. But just, to try to stay encouraged that there are resources and, to plug in someplace so that you can get fed and start helping the people in your life, and that's what it's all about.
And continue to have the conversation, because that's what I did with my children. I would go up to my daughter and be like, are you suicidal? Like, and I knew her plan, so I took away the means. Those means are locked up. She cannot get them.
Yep.
I think it's also, as trained mental health professionals, I think it's also very important to be very direct about suicide, to not sugarcoat it. So if you see some of those warning signs, are you thinking about killing yourself? Like, to be very specific and not beat around the bush. I know that's just something that we've learned is very important, and people are more receptive to that. Instead of, are you thinking about taking a bunch of pills so you don't wake up? No, don't talk, go into detail about it. Just say, are you thinking about killing yourself, or are you planning to commit suicide? So I think that's also very important to just be very specific and direct about it.
And so if they say yes, what do? Do you call 911, or do you just what? No, I'm serious.
Yeah, I think exactly what Cinnamon said. So in her presentation, she talked about, exactly what Cinnamon said in the presentation, getting down to that means, like, what is their plan? Are they thinking about using a gun? Are they thinking about using pills? And limiting the means, and then yes, immediately getting them to mental health help, because there are providers like Reid that has, the ability for at least adults, correct?
And kids.
And kids, oh right, because you have the care pavilion, yeah. So there are providers that can then keep them safe and create time.
So you want us to do 1, 2, and 3 before we go someplace else?
At least one. At the very minimum, identify if they
You guys
have,
so I can hear. I can't hear very well.
yeah, identify if they have means to whatever their plan is.
Yeah.
And then get help immediately. So at least, not necessarily 1, 2, and 3, at the very minimum 1.
But what if she says, okay, I'm gonna use a gun, but that's a lie, and she's planning on doing something else?
Exactly.
So then what?
I would say if she's identified, or if the person has identified that they are suicidal, I would still get access to services. So still call 911, still, whatever that is, and let them know. And just play it safe. But identify if they have any other means. Maybe she says that she is planning with a gun, but she has access to a lot of pills. Identify that and say, she has access to a lot of medications, and let them know on 911 that may be a means.
So when they come, what do? Haul them off to the hospital, or?
There's a lot of different things that go on once they do. They can provide an assessment or whatever, but sometimes it is that they get taken to the ER. Sometimes they are in contact with an already existing mental health provider. There's a lot of different things can happen from there.
But is it safe when you call the police and they think they're mental, that they don't shoot them or something like that? Handcuff them, take them out there and beat them up and all that kind of stuff?
They have specialized police officers that handle people.
Oh, okay, okay.
To how to approach somebody.
I got you.
And if you are concerned about that, you could always take your family member, like yourself, to the emergency room and let them know.
I didn't hear what you said.
I said, if you are concerned about having police involved or any other like professional involved, you can always just bring them directly to the emergency room yourself. I've done that for a family member where I got them in the car, we drove to the emergency room, and then from there, you know, they had that time in the emergency room and the support, so.
Can you share about, and then I know Susan had to leave,
Yeah.
but we have the community paramedic with the, can you explain that?
So one of the things Reid and even local community partners, we're trying to train more law enforcement in suicide risk and prevention. Yeah, and mental health. Yeah, because you're right? You take somebody in crisis and they're depressed or maybe they're paranoid or have some type of psychosis, and they may react when they see a police officer. So more and more police officers are getting trained in mental health. And Susan just left, but she's the director of inpatient psych, and she has all of our police officers at Reid and the ones that work upstairs are all trained in mental health to help, comfort or be supportive of those individuals.
But should put in there when you get to be a police officer, that would be mandatory.
Absolutely.
That they have that training.
That's one of the
Because I'll
things.
get one and they ain't got the training, I'm dead.
Absolutely, you're right. That's what Cinnamon was talking about, is that we need there's a lot of things that need to change, right? And slowly we're getting there, but not quick enough. I 100% agree. Because mental health, it's everywhere. It's just like cardiovascular diseases, right? Like heart attacks and it's everywhere. It leaks into everything. And so 100% everybody should be trained in it. All of our law enforcement.
Well, and I think something that, I apologize.
No, go ahead.
April. So I think something that April mentioned, the paramedicine
Wait a minute,
program.
guys, we can't hear her.
Something that April mentioned, the paramedicine program, there are people in the community in Wayne County that are working on this hard. So Elisa Werland at Purdue Extension has a group that's working on it. There's some other people, NAMI has a group that's working on things. So there are people in Wayne County that are working on these issues. So if you want to get connected to that, get someone who's affiliated. I can connect you with NAMI or Elisa at Purdue, and if you want more information about those conversations.
What about the kids? If a kid has a meltdown in school, and what are the teachers trained to realize that they're having a meltdown, or if they're...
Well, in Richmond Community Schools, they have a contract with Centerstone, and the Centerstone professionals are right there to help assist with that. So that's where I'm normally at 5 days a week. I'm at the high school with a lot of other staff there. We're at all the schools for Richmond, throughout Wayne County as well. Yeah, we do have, the SROs do have, the school resource officers do have risk assessments as well, and we do work hand in hand with them to work through whether it's a threat or whether it's a mental health assessment that really needs to be accomplished. So on the other end of that, we try to work together as a team.
I know as we're saying, a lot of times with mental health, the politics involved. I'm just going to go put it out there. I'm the board member for Wayne County for Centerstone of Indiana. And one of the challenges is, especially during and after COVID, we've had a lot of turnover because the mental health professionals they're exhausted. But the other thing is, everyone says we want to look at mental health, but they're not adding money to those budgets. So these people are working very hard. However, the salaries aren't equitable. So often, we also have to make sure with politics and adding with budgets that money's actually being added to those agendas.
Wholeheartedly agree.
And that's why we need community members and citizens to advocate with your legislature to say, hey, we need more money for these things, right? They listen to their constituents, hopefully.
Thank you for having me today.
Cinnamon, as well as my coworkers from Reid for being here, and for all of you joining us today.